The Enigma of Ravenwood Manor, a gripping murder mystery. Chapter 1. The Arrival at Ravenwood Manor. Soft rain patters against the cobblestone driveway, and an eerie mist clings to the air like an unspoken warning. Detective Jonathan Graves wasn't one to entertain ghost stories. A man of logic, precision, and unrelenting focus, he built his career solving the unsolvable, navigating the shadows of human deception like a seasoned chess player, anticipating his opponent's every move. But as his car rumbled up the winding path toward Ravenwood Manor, even he felt something shift in the air, a subtle, almost imperceptible heaviness, as though the very estate itself carried the weight of 1,000 secrets. The grand estate loomed before him, a relic of a bygone era. Gothic spires stretched toward the storm-streaked sky, ivy crawled up its stone facade, and massive arched windows, dark as the abyss, stared back at him like soulless eyes. It was the kind of place where the past refused to be forgotten. A letter had summoned him here, a desperate, hastily scrawled plea from Eleanor Blackwood, the estate's current owner and sole surviving member of the Ravenwood bloodline. Detective Graves, I fear I am in grave danger. My family's history is steeped in darkness, and now, I believe it has returned to claim me. Please, I beg you, come before it's too late. Graves had seen many pleas for help in his time, but this one carried a peculiar urgency, a desperation that lingered between the lines. The heavy iron gates groaned as they swung open, revealing a world frozen in time, manicured gardens gone wild, statues eroded by centuries of neglect, and a circular fountain, once grand, now dry and filled with nothing but dead leaves and shattered stone. As he stepped out of his car, the front doors of the manor creaked open on their own. No butler, no welcoming committee. Just the yawning darkness beyond the threshold. Hello? His voice carried into the void. Silence answered. With a steady breath, he stepped inside. The scent of old parchment, aged wood, and something faintly metallic clung to the air. The grand chandelier overhead flickered weakly, casting long, shifting shadows across the checkered marble floor. And then he saw it. Near the foot of the grand staircase, a single candle burned on a silver tray, illuminating an envelope with his name on it. A chill ran down his spine. He was expected, and somewhere within this house, so was the danger. Chapter 2. The haunting past of the manor, sound of distant thunder. A slow, eerie piano melody plays as the camera pans across the grand, dimly lit corridors of Ravenwood Manor. The candle flickered weakly, casting long, skeletal shadows along the walls as Detective Jonathan Graves lifted the envelope from the silver tray. His name had been scrawled in ink that had begun to bleed into the parchment, as though written in haste, or by a trembling hand. Detective Graves, welcome to Ravenwood Manor. By the time you read this, I may already be dead, but I pray you will uncover the truth before it's too late. The word sent a chill down his spine. Footsteps echoed from the upper landing. Graves tensed, his instincts kicking in. He turned sharply only to be met with the piercing, unblinking stare of Eleanor Blackwood. She was younger than he expected, early 30s, with striking dark eyes and a presence that exuded both fragility and strength. She wore a mourning dress, entirely black, except for the silver raven-shaped brooch at her collar. You received my letter, she said, voice barely above a whisper. I did. Graves studied her carefully. And now I need to know everything. She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder as if afraid of unseen eyes watching them. This house, it doesn't just hold secrets, Detective. It keeps them, traps them. Her voice lowered. And those who dig too deep don't always make it out. Graves remained unmoved. Start from the beginning. The curse of the Blackwood family. Cut to an old oil painting above the fireplace. Lord Alden Blackwood, the last official heir before Eleanor. For over 2 centuries, Ravenwood Manor had been home to the Blackwood family, a lineage of aristocrats, businessmen, and scholars. But for every tale of wealth and grandeur, there were whispers of something darker. Stories of unexplained disappearances, eerie sightings, and a blood-stained history that refused to be forgotten. The Vanishing Heir, 1893. Lord Alden Blackwood, Eleanor's great-grandfather, mysteriously disappeared one night, never to be seen again. His study was found locked from the inside, with no signs of forced entry. The only clue? A single raven's feather on his desk. The Maid Who Knew Too Much, 1921. A young housemaid, Clara Hensley, claimed she saw something unnatural lurking in the halls. The next morning, she was found drowned in the estate's fountain, her lungs filled with water, though no one had heard a splash. The Whispering Walls. Over the years, servants and guests alike reported hearing whispers at night, voices murmuring in a language no one could recognize. The library, in particular, was said to be a place where books moved on their own, and where shadows flickered without light. Back to the present, Graves listens intently. "And you?" Graves asked, watching Eleanor carefully. "What have you seen?" Her gaze darkened. "It's not what I've seen, Detective, it's what I've heard." She took a deep breath before whispering, "Every night at exactly 2:13 a.m. someone knocks on my bedroom door. When I open it, there's no one there." Graves remained silent, letting the weight of her words settle. Then a loud crash echoed from upstairs. Something, or someone, had just moved in the empty halls. Chapter 2. The Haunting Past of the Manor. Sound of distant thunder. A slow, eerie piano melody plays as the camera pans across the grand, dimly lit corridors of Ravenwood Manor. The candle flickered weakly, casting long, skeletal shadows along the walls as Detective Jonathan Graves lifted the envelope from the silver tray. His name had been scrawled in ink that had begun to bleed into the parchment, as though written in haste, or by a trembling hand. "Detective Graves, welcome to Ravenwood Manor. By the time you read this, I may already be dead. But I pray you will uncover the truth before it's too late." The words sent a chill down his spine. Footsteps echoed from the upper landing. Graves tensed, his instincts kicking in. He turned sharply, only to be met with the piercing, unblinking stare of Eleanor Blackwood. She was younger than he expected, early 30s, with striking dark eyes and a presence that exuded both fragility and strength. She wore a mourning dress, entirely black except for the silver raven-shaped brooch at her collar. "You received my letter," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "I did." Graves studied her carefully. "And now I need to know everything." She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder as if afraid of unseen eyes watching them. "This house, it doesn't just hold secrets, Detective, it keeps them, traps them." Her voice lowered. "And those who dig too deep don't always make it out." Graves remained unmoved. "Start from the beginning." The curse of the Blackwood family, cut to an old oil painting above the fireplace. Lord Alden Blackwood, the last official heir before Eleanor. For over 2 centuries, Ravenwood Manor had been home to the Blackwood family, a lineage of aristocrats, businessmen, and scholars. But for every tale of wealth and grandeur, there were whispers of something darker. Stories of unexplained disappearances, eerie sightings, and a blood-stained history that refused to be forgotten. The Vanishing Heir, 1893. Lord Alden Blackwood, Eleanor's great-grandfather, mysteriously disappeared one night, never to be seen again. His study was found locked from the inside, with no signs of forced entry. The only clue? A single raven's feather on his desk. The Maid Who Knew Too Much, 1921. A young housemaid, Clara Hensley, claimed she saw something unnatural lurking in the halls. The next morning, she was found drowned in the estate's fountain, her lungs filled with water, though no one had heard a splash. The Whispering Walls. Over the years, servants and guests alike reported hearing whispers at night, voices murmuring in a language no one could recognize. The library, in particular, was said to be a place where books moved on their own, and where shadows flickered without light. Back to the present, Graves listens intently. "And you?" Graves asked, watching Eleanor carefully. "What have you seen?" Her gaze darkened. "It's not what I've seen, Detective, it's what I've heard." She took a deep breath before whispering, Every night at exactly 2:13 a.m. someone knocks on my bedroom door. When I open it, there's no one there. Graves remained silent, letting the weight of her words settle. Then a loud crash echoed from upstairs. Something or someone had just moved in the empty halls. Chapter 3. The murder that shakes the manor. Lightning flashes outside the towering windows, illuminating the darkened halls of Ravenwood Manor. The sound of heavy rain pounds against the roof as Detective Graves cautiously ascends the grand staircase. The crash had come from the second floor. Graves's instincts told him to move fast but cautiously. Every step he took up the creaking wooden stairs echoed through the vast manor. Eleanor followed closely behind, her breath shallow, her fingers trembling as she clutched the edges of her black dress. "Stay close," Graves muttered. At the top of the staircase, a long corridor stretched before them, lined with portraits of long-dead Blackwoods, their eyes following every move. And then, another sound, a faint creak from the west wing. Graves turned sharply toward the noise, pushing through a set of heavy oak doors into the library. His sharp eyes scanned the massive room, towering bookshelves, a grand fireplace, and the unmistakable scent of old parchment and something metallic. Something sharp. And then he saw it. Near the center of the room, sprawled across the ornate Persian rug, was a body, Nathaniel Hargrave, the estate's lawyer. His face was frozen in an expression of shock, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. But it was the deep gash across his throat that seized Graves's attention. Blood pooled beneath him, staining the rug a deep crimson. Eleanor let out a strangled gasp, covering her mouth. "Oh my God." Graves crouched beside the body, still warm. The murder had just happened. His detective instincts kicked in, his mind already piecing together the details. Cause of death. A deep, clean cut across the throat, likely done with a razor-sharp blade, precise and deliberate. Position of the body, no signs of a struggle. Hargrave had been caught completely off guard. The scene itself. The library doors were locked from the inside. No broken windows, no sign of forced entry. A classic locked room murder. But how? And more importantly, who? Chapter 4. The suspects in the shadows. Lightning flickers again, illuminating the faces of the gathered guests as Graves begins his interrogation. Within an hour, every remaining guest and staff member was gathered in the drawing room. The tension was suffocating, the fear palpable. Someone in this room was a killer. Graves took a slow, deliberate look at each person. Every face had a story. Every pair of eyes held a secret. Eleanor Blackwood, the heiress. The one who had called him here. Was she truly a frightened victim? Or was she leading him into a web of deception? Victor Blackwood, the estranged cousin. A brooding man with a sharp tongue and a cold demeanor. Recently returned to the estate after a decade-long absence. A coincidence? Margaret Holloway, the housekeeper. Loyal to the Blackwood family for decades, knows every creak, every hidden passage in this house. But does she know too much? Dr. Charles Whitmore, the physician. A respected doctor, but one with a past filled with professional scandals and whispers of malpractice. Felix Langley, the historian. A scholar obsessed with the Blackwood legacy. His knowledge of the family's past is extensive, perhaps even deadly. Graves crossed his arms. Someone in this room had blood on their hands. "Let's start from the beginning," he said, voice steady, commanding. "Who was the last person to see Nathaniel Hargrave alive?" The room fell silent. Then, Victor Blackwood spoke. "I was," he admitted. "We had an argument earlier this evening." Graves's eyes narrowed. "About what?" Victor exhaled sharply. "The will." A murmur swept through the room. "The will?" Eleanor's voice was strained. "What are you talking about?" Victor hesitated. Then, with a reluctant sigh, he admitted, "Hargrave had requested a private meeting with me. He claimed he had information that could change the course of the Blackwood inheritance." Graves frowned. Was this a motive? Had Hargrave uncovered a truth that got him killed? Then Margaret Holloway, the housekeeper, spoke up. "I heard something." Her voice was shaky. right before the murder. All eyes turned to her. "What did you hear?" Graves pressed. She swallowed hard. Footsteps, fast ones, right outside the library. But when I looked, the corridor was empty. A trick of the mind? Or had the killer slipped away unseen? Graves turned to the room, his mind racing. The puzzle pieces were there, but they didn't fit. Not yet. One thing was certain. The killer was still inside Ravenwood Manor, and they weren't finished yet. Chapter 5. A second death and a chilling discovery. The storm rages outside, wind howling through the cracks of the old manor. The grandfather clock strikes midnight, its chime reverberating through the vast, empty halls. Then, another scream cuts through the darkness. Graves sprinted toward the sound, Eleanor close behind him. The noise had come from the east wing, near the old servants' quarters. The hallway was lined with dust-covered portraits, their painted eyes watching as he ran past. The door to room 6 was ajar. A faint, flickering candle illuminated the space. Graves pushed the door open, his pulse hammering. And there it was, another body. Margaret Holloway, the housekeeper. She was slumped forward in a wooden chair, her head tilted at an unnatural angle. A thin, bloodied cord was wrapped tightly around her throat, cutting into the flesh. Her hands had clawed at it, signs of a desperate struggle. But the most disturbing detail was the note pinned to her dress, a single piece of parchment. The ink had bled slightly, as if written with an unsteady hand. She knew too much. Eleanor gasped, stepping back. Oh, dear God. Graves clenched his jaw. 2 murders in one night. The killer was getting bolder. No sign of forced entry. No footprints on the dusty floor. It was as if the murderer had slipped in and out like a ghost. Graves examined Margaret's body closely. She was the one who had overheard the footsteps near the library. Had she recognized the murderer? Had she gone to confront them? He turned to Eleanor. Who else has access to this wing of the house? She hesitated. No one, except the staff, and myself. A terrible thought settled in Graves's mind. What if the killer wasn't just eliminating threats? What if they were following a pattern? The locked room mystery deepens. After sealing off the crime scene, Graves gathered the remaining guests once again in the drawing room. This was no longer about secrets. This was survival. He faced the suspects, eyes sharp. One of them was lying. One of them was a murderer, Victor Blackwood, the estranged cousin with a financial motive. But would he kill twice? Dr. Charles Whitmore, a man with medical knowledge of how to kill silently. Felix Langley, the historian, fascinated by the estate's dark past. Could his obsession have turned deadly? Eleanor Blackwood, the grieving heiress. But was she truly a victim or a mastermind? Graves took a slow breath before speaking. Margaret Holloway was strangled to death, and the killer left a message. She knew too much. Silence. Then Felix Langley cleared his throat. What exactly did she know? That's what I intend to find out, Graves said. Because whoever killed Margaret, they're trying to erase something. A truth that's been buried in this house for years. Victor scoffed, arms crossed. You're chasing shadows, detective. This house is cursed. We all know that. I don't believe in curses, Mr. Blackwood. I believe in killers. Just then, the lights flickered. The storm outside roared, and for a brief moment the room was cast in utter darkness. And in that fleeting second, Graves heard it. A whisper. Not from anyone in the room, but from the shadows themselves. Chapter 6. Secrets beneath the manor. The storm continues, rain lashing against the tall windows. The flickering candlelight casts eerie shadows across the ancient tapestries. Something unseen lurks beneath the surface of Ravenwood Manor. After the murders, Graves couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something critical. The layout of the house. The secret history. the hidden connections between the Blackwood family and these deaths. That's when he remembered the library. Margaret had overheard footsteps near the library before she died. The library was where Hargrave had been killed. Something about that room held the key. At 2 a.m., while the rest of the guests were locked in their rooms under Graves's strict orders, he made his way down the dimly lit corridor, candle in hand. The library door groaned open. The scent of old parchment and dust filled the air, but something else lingered, a scent barely detectable, a faint metallic tang, blood, and something else. Rot. Graves moved to the bookshelf where Hargrave's body had been found. The thick rug beneath him muffled his steps. Then, his foot sank lower than expected. His breath hitched. He knelt down, running his fingers along the edge of the rug, and found a seam, a trap door. Slowly, carefully, he lifted it. A gust of stale air rushed past him, carrying the scent of decay. A stone staircase descended into darkness. The forgotten chamber. Graves lit his lantern and stepped down, his breath steady but his heart racing. The stone steps were damp, the air thick with dust and time. Then, he saw it, a hidden chamber beneath the manor, and at its center, resting upon an ancient wooden table, lay a skeletal remains wrapped in tattered Blackwood family garments. But this was no ordinary skeleton. The skull had been crushed. Graves's pulse quickened. The real Blackwood secret was buried here. This wasn't just a house of whispers and ghosts. This was a house of murderers, a shocking revelation. As Graves stood in the dark chamber, his mind raced. Who was this? And why had they been hidden away? Then, footsteps. From above. Someone else had entered the library. Graves extinguished his lantern, pressed against the stone wall. He listened as the trapdoor creaked open again. A dim glow flickered. A silhouette appeared at the top of the stairs. Someone had followed him down. Someone who didn't want this secret to be uncovered. The figure stepped forward, and for the first time since arriving at Ravenwood Manor, Detective Jonathan Graves felt something he hadn't felt in years. Real, palpable fear. Chapter 7. The killer revealed a descent into darkness. Graves pressed himself against the damp stone wall, barely breathing. The flickering lantern above cast an eerie glow over the skeletal remains on the table. Footsteps echoed down the hidden staircase, measured, controlled. Whoever was coming wasn't rushing. They were taking their time. Graves reached for his revolver, his grip steady. He had faced killers before, but this felt different. The figure stepped into view. Dr. Charles Whitmore. The elderly physician's face was eerily calm. His gloved hands rested behind his back. His shadow stretched across the cold stone floor. Graves exhaled slowly. Dr. Whitmore. The doctor sighed, shaking his head. You were always too clever, Graves. Graves kept his gun trained on him. You killed Hargrave. You killed Margaret. Why? Whitmore took a step closer, his voice almost gentle. Because some secrets should stay buried. The truth about the skeleton. Graves glanced at the skeletal remains on the table, the crushed skull, the rotting Blackwood garments. Who is this? Graves demanded. Whitmore tilted his head. Isn't it obvious? Edgar Blackwood, the rightful heir to Ravenwood Manor. Graves's mind reeled. Edgar Blackwood had vanished decades ago. The family had claimed he had died in an accident. But here he was, murdered. Victor Blackwood, Graves murmured, the realization hitting him like a blow. He isn't the real heir. He stole this house. Whitmore nodded slowly. Edgar was the true heir, but Victor was the one with ambition. He and his brother, Eleanor's father, murdered Edgar in secret. They hid his body here, beneath the manor, where no one would ever find him. They rewrote history, erased Edgar from existence. Eleanor. Graves' chest tightened. Did she know? Whitmore took another step closer. You don't understand, Detective. This house has been built on lies. Generations of deceit. I have spent my life protecting the Blackwood name, and I will not let you destroy it. A killer's confession. Graves narrowed his eyes. That's why you killed Hargrave. Because he found out, didn't he? Whitmore exhaled, almost wistfully. He was an intelligent man. Too intelligent. He shook his head. He pieced it together, the missing records, the inconsistencies in Victor's inheritance. He came to me first, Graves. He wanted to expose the truth. Whitmore's eyes darkened. I couldn't allow that. Graves felt his pulse quicken. And Margaret? Whitmore's lips pressed into a thin line. She heard too much. She was always listening at doors, prying into things she shouldn't. When she overheard us discussing Hargrave's death, I knew she had to be silenced. Graves tightened his grip on the revolver. Cold fury burned in his chest. 2 innocent people were dead because of this man. A deadly standoff. Graves took a step forward. It's over, Whitmore. There's nowhere left to run. Whitmore's expression didn't change. I disagree. With a flick of his wrist, he pulled a dagger from his coat. The blade glinted in the candlelight. Graves raised his gun. Drop it. Whitmore chuckled. I was performing surgeries before you were even born, Detective. You think I fear a bullet? Then, he lunged. Graves barely dodged in time, twisting his body as the blade slashed through the air. The tip grazed his arm, drawing a hot sting of blood. Whitmore was fast for his age. Too fast. Graves steadied himself, focusing. The doctor came at him again, this time aiming for his throat. Bang. The gunshot rang through the chamber. Whitmore stumbled back. A crimson bloom spread across his chest. For a moment he just stood there, looking down at the wound as if in disbelief. Then, his knees buckled, and he collapsed to the cold stone floor. The nightmare was over. But the aftermath. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving a heavy mist over Ravenwood Manor. The bodies were removed. The truth was finally exposed. Victor Blackwood was arrested for his role in Edgar's murder decades ago. His wealth, his title, his inheritance, all built on a lie. Eleanor, shaken and devastated, sat in the grand drawing room staring at the dying embers of the fireplace. Graves approached. You didn't know, did you? She shook her head. Tears glistened in her eyes. I thought my father was a good man. I thought... Her voice broke. Graves hesitated before placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. The sins of the past don't define you. You're not them, Eleanor. She swallowed hard, nodding. As Graves prepared to leave Ravenwood Manor, something nagged at him. The skeleton. Whitmore had claimed it was Edgar Blackwood. But something felt off. Graves returned to the hidden chamber one last time. He knelt beside the remains, studying the fragments of cloth. Then he noticed it. A tiny, barely legible engraving on a rusted pendant. Not E.B., but R.B. Graves's blood ran cold. This wasn't Edgar Blackwood. This was Richard Blackwood, the family patriarch, the man who had built Ravenwood Manor, which meant Edgar Blackwood had never died. Graves turned sharply, his pulse spiking. Somewhere in the depths of Ravenwood Manor, he could almost hear a faint chuckle. And just like that, the case wasn't over after all. The end. A slow fade to black, the whisper of the wind through the empty hall, and then silence.